Imagine a game that lets you play as Terminator Arnold and lets you wear his leather jacket and sunglasses. A game that lets you play out some of the 2003 blockbuster movie's greatest moments. It was practically a movie designed to be a great game. Unfortunately, instead of that, Atari decided to give us this pile of trash that is essentially a massive catfish and slap in the face for any fans of the Terminator franchise. The game's box art even tricks you into thinking that you'll be playing out the most iconic scenes from the movie. But rather than just following the ready-made movie plotline, Atari decided to make players spend 75% of the game in a completely made-up storyline taking place in the future. So if you're a big fan of the series and thought repeatedly throughout the game, when did this happen in the movie? Don't worry, you're not alone. Here's why Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines is still considered to this day one of the worst games of all time and why it deserves to be curb-stomped into Judgment Day. Alright, let's talk about the story because how could you possibly mess up the story for a game based on a movie that earned almost $500 million at the box office? Oh, here's how. You don't follow the movie storyline at all. Seriously, for the first 80% of the game, you're Arnold Schwarzenegger in the post-Judgment Day world, trying to fight your way to infiltrate Skynet to access the time-traveling device. You know, stuff that doesn't happen in the movie at all. Because if you remember in the movie, Arnold just appears in the present day, just butt-ass naked and ready to go. Apparently, Atari thought we needed the whole backstory behind that, and guess what? We didn't. Because in these missions, you'll have to run through countless poorly designed levels, flipping random switches and shooting lasers through random things to continue on to the next level where you'll have to do the same thing again and again. And after you do all of this, and only then in the last 20% of the game do you actually play out the scenes in the movie, you'll get to play through scenes such as the animal hospital, the cemetery, and finally the bunker. The levels from the movie seem like such an afterthought and so rushed that it felt like Atari completely forgot that they were supposed to make a Terminator game and threw something in there at the last minute only when they remembered. You know how I know this? Because the entire first portion of the game is a first-person shooter where you walk around horrendous-looking levels, but for the second part, it becomes an awful fighting game where you fight Mortal Kombat style against the TX. We'll talk more on this later, but holy smokes is it terrible. Alright, so let's move on to the horrendous gameplay. Probably the most egregious thing about this game is that it literally made being Terminator Arnold not fun at all, which would be borderline impossible to do, almost criminal. First of all, you're basically playing laser tag for the first half of the game. I'm not kidding, your weapon is a laser gun, but you don't really notice it ever actually doing anything to the enemies. The enemy Terminators don't even flinch when you shoot them, so it actually feels like you're fighting with one of those laser pointers that your middle school teachers used back in the day with the overhead projector. Do you guys even remember those? If you're too young for that reference, congratulations, I'm officially old. But for all you kids, it's like fighting with a flashlight. You would think that the game physics get better in the later levels when you're finally able to use normal human guns, but no, even your bullets seem to have no weight behind them at all. I couldn't tell if my bullets were killing the enemies or tickling them. Also, you're supposed to be Arnold as the Terminator, but you don't feel like it at all. It looks and feels like a generic first-person shooter. If you didn't already know that you were playing a Terminator game, you wouldn't have any way to know that based off the gameplay itself. The world and the levels are so bland and boring. I get that the first part of the game is supposed to take place in a post-apocalyptic world, but even so, the levels feel so empty and ugly. There's nothing to explore in any level whatsoever. The level design truly feels like a cheap, basic PC sci-fi indie game that you can buy for $2 on Steam. It's just an incredibly ugly game in almost every capacity. Every level is full of bland and flat textures, horrible and stiffly animated character models, and the endless streams of badly designed levels make the game an absolute eyesore to look at. On top of all that, there are a ton of weird glitches throughout the game as well. For example, when enemy Terminators fall to the ground after taking a hit, they sometimes spring back up as if they'd never fallen in the first place. It's just super weird and sloppy. The game is also way too easy. I get that you're supposed to be the Terminator, which is practically an indestructible killing machine, but it almost seems too easy. Instead of a subtle aim assist that most first-person shooters have, this game for some reason gives you an auto lock-on button that practically makes this game a shooting gallery. If you hold down the left shoulder button, all you have to do is fire your weapon and the game does all the work for you. Let's talk about the game's sound for a moment. I think Atari somehow convinced Arnold to do some voice acting for the game, but I couldn't tell because all Arnold says are one-liners like affirmative or got it throughout each level. I don't know if Arnold provided voice acting for this or if Atari just found some sound bites from the movies.
Excellent.
Now, I get that the Terminator isn't really a talker, but there's legitimately no reason to have Arnold acting in a game if the lines are going to be as repetitive and bland as the ones in this game. The mind-numbingly dull missions are occasionally broken up by fighting sequences where you switch to a third-person perspective and take on the TX or another Arnold Terminator in hand-to-hand combat. You know, some of the best action scenes from the movie are when Arnold faces off against the TX and destroys everything in their way, but unfortunately the game's action sequences might suck even more than the rest of the game. The fighting consists of you mashing 3 buttons for kicking, punching, and throwing. There's also a block button, so during these fighting sequences, you're just button mashing for about 2 minutes until it ends. That's about it, and it's incredibly lame and boring. I guess you can pick up objects here and there and portions of the environment are destructible like they are in the movie, but the controls are really unresponsive and so it's frustrating to time your attacks. So this is all to say that Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines was a massive disappointment, especially for fans of the movie. The game is just ugly in almost every aspect, from the visuals to the level structure and just the feel of the game. It just doesn't capture the spirit of the movie franchise, and it just feels like a generic sci-fi game that you can pretty much find anywhere. This game truly does not hold up through the test of time, and I would rate this game as somewhere between playing imaginary laser tag and accidentally finding toddler crap in a Chuck E. Cheese ball pit.
Lock and load.
Well, what did you all think about this game? Do you remember it fondly through your nostalgia, or do you agree that this was just an atrocious game? Let me know in the comments below. Well, thanks for watching, and as always, see you again soon.
Skynet started their war against the human race. Over 150 missiles were launched in the first 20 minutes.